Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the show that takes a whole stack of sources, boils them down, and gives you the insights you really need.
Yep, arming you with the knowledge to be, well, truly informed on complex topics.
And today, wow, we are plunging into something that honestly holds just mind-boggling potential, especially for anyone like you shaping young minds.
It really does. Get this statistic. The average student, by the time they hit 21, has spent around 10,000 hours playing computer games.
10,000 hours. That's pretty much the same amount of time they spend in school.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think about that. It just completely reframes how we see screen time, doesn't it?
Totally. So if you're an elementary education major, maybe just starting to get curious about game-based learning or GBL, imagine harnessing just a tiny fraction of that engagement, that natural, intense focus kids have for real learning.
It's a massive opportunity. It's not just kids zoning out. It's this huge reservoir of intrinsic motivation, active participation, things we as educators should be seriously looking at.
Right. So our mission today, specifically for you, our listener who's maybe new to GBL, is to really unpack the emotional foundations of it all.
And we mean really unpack. We're going way beyond just saying, oh, games are fun, because, well, it's more complicated than that.
Definitely. We need to understand what emotions are actually in the mix when kids play to learn. But more than that, why those emotions are so critical for, genuine, deep learning.
And the big one, how? How can you actually design these GBL environments thoughtfully? How can you harness those emotions effectively for your young learners right there in your own classroom?
We'll be weaving in real-world connections, practical examples from elementary classrooms all the way through, trying to make it super relevant for you.
And what's really fascinating, maybe even a bit counterintuitive, is that GBL isn't just constant fun like the ad sometimes suggests, learning through intense enjoyment.
Yeah, if only it were that simple.
Right. The research actually shows learners go through a whole spectrum of feelings. Frustration, boredom, definitely, even confusion.
Which sounds bad, but maybe isn't always.
Exactly. We have to look beneath that surface level fun to see the whole picture, the whole rich tapestry of emotional experiences.
And this isn't just like interesting trivia for educational psychologists. This link between emotion and learning, it's crucial.
Absolutely crucial. Emotions aren't just happening alongside the learning, like some nice side effect.
No, they directly, profoundly impact how kids process information, how motivated they are to even try, how much they remember later.
Their actual learning outcomes. It's not a side effect at all. It's totally central. Especially in game-based learning.
Okay, so if emotions are that central, that tangled up with everything, how do we even start to define them? How do we categorize them in a way that's actually useful for someone planning lessons or maybe even designing a game?
That's the key question. We need practical tools. And the sources we looked at break down emotion into 5 core components. Getting a grip on these is like having a decoder ring for what your students are feeling.
Okay, 5 components, lay them on me.
All right, first up, the affective component. This is the core feeling itself. That's subjective internal experience. Like the pure excitement a kid feels when they finally crack a tough puzzle in a math game.
Or that bubbly joy when their avatar levels up after they mastered something, that feeling inside.
Exactly, the visceral thing.
Yeah.
Then, tied right into that, is the cognitive component.
Okay, cognitive. So thoughts.
Yep. The specific thoughts that bubble up with that feeling.
Right.
So if a student feels joy, they might think, hey, I'm good at this. This is fun. Confidence, right?
Right. But if they're frustrated...
Then the thoughts might be more like, this is too hard. I'm never going to get it. Maybe I'm just bad at science.
Yeah.
It's that internal chatter that reinforces or, fights the feeling.
Makes sense. What's next?
The physiological component. This is what's happening in the body. Tangible stuff.
Like sweaty palms.
Could be. Or think about a kid who's super engaged, really enjoying a game. They might be leaning forward, eyes wide. Maybe their heart's beating a bit faster. Their body is activated, right?
Okay. And boredom.
You might see the opposite. Slumping posture. Maybe looking away. Just a general lack of, physical energy. Their body's reflecting that disengagement.
Got it. Affective, cognitive, physiological. What else?
Number 4 is the motivational component. This is about what the emotion makes you want to do. Your behavioral tendencies.
So if it feels good, you want more.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Enjoyment, success. These make you want to dive back in, try harder, stick with it longer. You're motivated to keep feeling that positive state.
And if it feels bad, like boredom or frustration.
Motivation tanks. You might want to quit, look for distractions, maybe start fiddling with the avatar settings instead of doing the actual task, or even try to cheat the system just to get it over with. Effort just plummets.
Okay, one more component then.
The last one is the expressive component. And this is huge for you as a teacher because it's what you can actually see or hear.
The outward side.
Exactly. A kid's beaming smile.
Right.
Or that little fist pump when they nail a hard level. But also the frustrated sigh, the slumped shoulders, maybe muttering under their breath.
Facial expressions, body language, tone of voice.
All of it. How they hold themselves. Are they leaning in eagerly or pulling away? Picking up on these cues, even the subtle ones, is so important in the classroom.
Okay, so those 5 components, affective, cognitive, physiological, motivational, expressive, give us a much richer picture of what emotion means here.
Right. And with that foundation, we can start classifying these emotions in ways that are actually helpful for designing GBL.
Oh.
Our sources point to 2 main ways to do this.
Okay, what are they?
The first is pretty broad, called the dimensional approach. Think of it like a quick weather report for emotions.
A weather report. How so?
It uses 2 simple dimensions or axes. First is valence. Is the feeling pleasant or unpleasant, good or bad? Joy versus anxiety, for example.
Okay, pleasantness. And the second?
Activation. Is the emotion activating or deactivating?
Yeah.
Does it energize you, get you ready for action, or does it make you feel kind of sluggish and checked out?
So you could have like pleasant and activating, like excitement.
Exactly. Or unpleasant and deactivating, like hopelessness or deep boredom. It gives you a general map of the student's emotional state, their energy level, and whether it feels good or bad. A first glance.
Useful, but maybe a bit general for specific design choices.
That's where the second approach comes in, looking at discrete emotions and, crucially, their object focus.
Object focus meaning?
Meaning, what specifically triggered the emotion? What's it about? This is super useful for GBL design because if you know what triggers, say, frustration, you can try to design around it or manage it.
Gotcha. So what kinds of discrete emotions are important here?
Our sources highlight several key groups. First, and maybe most obviously for learning, are achievement emotions.
Achievement. So tied to doing well or poorly.
Precisely. They pop up in relation to activities or outcomes where competence matters, how good a student feels they are or how well they think they're doing. And there are a couple of types within this.
Okay.
You've got activity emotions. These happen during the activity itself while the child's actually playing or learning.
Like the feeling while you're building something.
Exactly. Picture a student totally absorbed, feeling that pure joy while they're figuring out how to sequence commands in a block coding game.
Yeah.
They're in the zone,
Right.
Experiencing flow.
Yeah, totally engaged.
Now contrast that with the feeling they might get if that same game suddenly makes them do 50 super easy, repetitive math problems they already know. That's likely to trigger boredom, right? The feeling comes directly from the nature of the task itself.
Makes sense. Activity emotions happen during, what's the other type?
Outcome emotions? These are tied more to the results, success or failure, or even just thinking about success or failure.
Okay, so before or after?
Both. They can be perspective, looking ahead. Think about a student facing a really tricky puzzle in a science game. They might feel hope. Ooh, this looks tough, but cool. I hope I can figure it out.
Or maybe anxiety.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Like if they're about to start a timed reading quiz in the game that feels really hard, they might feel anxiety. Oh no, what if I run out of time? What if I fail? It's all about anticipating the outcome.
And the other kind of outcome emotion.
Retrospective.
Yeah.
Looking back. This is where you get that fist pump of pride after solving that super complex math problem. Yes, I did it.
Or maybe relief?
Huge one. That sigh of relief after finally finishing a really difficult quest or level that felt impossible just minutes before. But can also be negative looking back.
Like feeling bad about messing up.
Right. Deep shame over a very public game over screen with a loud negative sound. Or maybe disappointment because their virtual pet didn't thrive because they didn't answer enough science questions correctly. How the game frames success and failure is huge here.
Okay, so achievement emotions cover feelings about doing the task and the results. What else?
Next up, a really interesting category. Epistemic emotions.
Epistemic, like
Well-
knowledge.
Exactly. These are triggered by the information itself and how we process it. There are the emotions of discovery, of figuring things out, of learning.
Cool. Like what?
Think about surprise. That jolt when a game presents information that totally contradicts what you thought you knew. Or curiosity. That powerful pull, that desire to know more, that makes a student click on that extra info button or explore that optional side quest in the game.
Curiosity is huge for learning.
Absolutely. And then there's confusion. When the information is contradictory, maybe too complex, or just unclear.
Infusion sounds negative, though.
It can feel negative, but it can be incredibly productive in learning. Imagine a science game about animal classification. Maybe two virtual experts in the game disagree on how to classify a weird new creature.
Okay, that would be surprising.
Right. That surprise might spark curiosity. Huh, why do they disagree? And as the student looks at the conflicting evidence, they might feel confusion. But a well-designed game helps them work through that confusion, analyze the evidence, and bam, they figure it out.
And that feeling of figuring it out after being confused
Is often intense enjoyment and satisfaction. So confusion, managed well, can be a powerful catalyst for deeper thinking.
fascinating. Okay, what other types of emotions?
We also have social emotions. These arise from interactions with others, real peers in multiplayer games, or even virtual characters.
So feelings about other people in the game.
Yeah, like feeling admiration for a classmate's really creative contribution in a collaborative story-writing game. Or maybe a flash of envy if someone gets a much higher score in a competitive math race.
Or even feeling happy when someone else messes up.
That's Schadenfreude, and yeah, it can happen, especially in competitive settings. This really highlights how important the design is cooperative versus competitive. Cooperative games often foster more positive social feelings, like camaraderie.
Whereas competition, if not careful, can lead to envy or feeling bad if you lose.
Exactly. It shapes the whole emotional climate.
Okay. We also have topic emotions.
Right. These are just feelings triggered by the actual subject matter, the content being learned.
So feeling empathy for a character.
Perfect example. Maybe a game about ecosystems has a character trying to save a virtual dolphin from pollution. A child might feel strong empathy, which then makes them way more engaged in learning about marine biology and conservation.
Or maybe anger if the topic is like historical injustice.
Absolutely. And that anger, while maybe uncomfortable, can also fuel deeper engagement and critical thinking about the topic.
Then there are aesthetic emotions.
Yep. Responses to the beauty, the art, the sensory experience of the game.
Like the graphics and music.
Totally. That feeling of awe, exploring a stunningly designed virtual ancient Egypt in a history game. Or the pure joy from a super catchy song in a phonics game that just makes learning fun. These aren't just window dressing. They make the environment inviting and can even make learning feel less difficult.
Okay, nearly there. Technology emotions.
These are reactions to the tech itself. We've all been there, right?
Oh, yeah. Like frustration when the game lags or the touch screen doesn't respond.
Exactly. Or that sudden computer anxiety when something crashes. But also the simple enjoyment of a really smooth, intuitive interface that just works perfectly. For little kids, tech glitches can be a huge barrier, causing instant frustration.
Good point. And the last category.
Incidental emotions. These are feelings bleeding in from outside the game.
Like being upset about something that happened at lunch.
Precisely. Or feeling tired. Or excited about a birthday party later. These aren't caused by the game, but they absolutely affect a student's focus and how they feel while playing. A teacher needs to be aware of these outside influences too.
Wow, okay. That's a lot of different types of emotions to consider.
Yeah.
Achievement, epistemic, social, topic, aesthetic, technology, incidental.
It is, but having these categories helps us think more clearly about what might be going on when a student is interacting with a learning game.
So now we know what they are. Where do they actually come from in GBL? What triggers them?
The antecedents. This is where it gets really practical for design. Our sources lean heavily on a framework called the control value theory, or CVT. It's a really useful lens for understanding this.
Control value theory. Okay, break it down.
Basically, CVT says emotions in learning situations arise mainly from two things interacting. First, how learners appraise the situation, their immediate perceptions. These are called proximal factors.
Appraisals, like how they judge what's happening.
Exactly. And second, there's emotional transmission catching feelings from others, plus deeper things like learner personality and the game's features. Those are more distal or background factors, but the immediate appraisals are key.
Let's dig into those appraisals first then, especially for those achievement emotions we talked about.
Right. CVT says achievement emotions hinge on two main appraisals: perceived control and perceived value.
Control and value. Okay, what's perceived control?
It's how much you feel like you're in charge, like you have agency. A big part of this is self-efficacy, your belief in your own ability to do the task.
So feeling like I can do this.
Pretty much. Imagine a kindergartner, let's call her Maya, playing a game where she arranges virtual blocks to match a pattern. If she feels like she understands the controls, can pick up the blocks, and can figure out the patterns, her perceived control is high.
And what if she gets stuck?
Good question. If the game gives feedback like, "Nice try, Maya. Look closely at the colors. You've almost got it," That reinforces her sense of control. It suggests she can succeed with a bit more effort or a different strategy rather than just being bad at it.
Okay, so perceived control is about feeling capable and in charge. What about perceived value?
This is simply how important, useful, or interesting the activity or its outcome seems to the student. Is it worth doing?
And that value can come from different places.
Yep. It could be intrinsic interest. They just genuinely find dinosaurs fascinating, so a dinosaur game is valuable in itself. Or it could be instrumental. Doing well in the game earns them points to customize their cool robot avatar.
Ah, so the reward gives the task value.
Right. Or maybe a game about fractions involves baking a virtual cake, and getting the fractions right is the only way to make the cake look yummy. That's inherently valuable if the student enjoys the baking simulation. Without value, even easy tasks feel pointless.
This makes me think about failure in games. It often feels different than failing in class.
That's a huge point. GBL can really excel at fostering graceful failure.
Graceful failure. I like that.
Instead of a big red F or public embarrassment, games often let you just try again immediately. Maybe a funny animation plays or a character shrugs it off.
Yeah, no big deal. Just try again.
Exactly. This shifts the focus from avoiding mistakes at all costs to seeing them as just information, a natural part of figuring things out. Instead of a harsh, wrong sound, maybe a gentle chime and a hint.
So it helps kids develop more of a growth mindset. Like failure isn't the end, just a step.
Precisely. It lowers the stakes, reduces fear, and builds that sense of control. Okay, that didn't work. Let me try this instead. That's incredibly powerful for young learners.
So control and value. How do they combine to create specific emotions?
CBT maps this out quite neatly. Think about it. High control plus positive value. That's your recipe for joy or deep enjoyment. You feel competent, the task is meaningful or fun, you're in the flow state.
Okay, makes sense. What if control is just okay?
Moderate control plus positive value often leads to hope. You see a challenge ahead, it looks doable but not easy, and you're hopeful you can succeed. That sweet spot of difficulty.
But low control.
That's where things get tricky. Low control plus negative value, meaning you feel helpless and the task feels pointless. That's a direct path to hopelessness. You just want to give up.
What about feeling stuck, but you still kind of care?
That's often frustration. You have low control, but you have a negative evaluation of the obstacle. It feels unfair or impossible. You're banging your head against a wall. It's activating, but unpleasant.
And boredom, where does that fit?
Boredom can happen with either high or low control if there's simply no value. If a game is way too easy, high control, no challenge, no value, or way too hard, low control feels pointless, no value, or just repetitive and meaningless, boom, boredom sets in fast.
That really highlights why just slapping points onto a boring worksheet game doesn't work, if there's no real value.
Exactly. It's the chocolate-covered broccoli problem. Kids see right through it.
Okay, so those are appraisals for achievement emotions. What about those epistemic emotions like curiosity and confusion? Where do they come from?
Those arise from a different kind of appraisal. Cognitive incongruity.
Cognitive incongruity.
Oh,
Fancy term.
It just means there's a mismatch. The information is unexpected, or it contradicts what you know, or it's complex and doesn't fit neatly.
Like those disagreeing virtual scientists.
Perfect example. That disagreement creates incongruity. It makes you go, wait, what? That triggers surprise? Then hopefully curiosity. Why do they disagree? Let me find out.
Yeah.
And maybe confusion as you sift through the evidence. Resolving that incongruity is what leads to the aha moment and the enjoyment.
So presenting kids with things that challenge their thinking in a supported way can actually spark positive learning emotions.
Absolutely. Productive confusion is a powerful learning tool when handled well.
Okay, so appraisals are huge. What about that other factor, emotional transmission?
Right. Emotions can be contagious. There are a few ways this happens. One is entrainment.
Entrainment, like following along.
Sort of. It's syncing up unconsciously with external rhythms. Think about music in a game. Fast, upbeat music can literally make students feel more energized and alert, ready for a quick-fire quiz game. It syncs their internal state.
And slow music might calm them down for a puzzle.
Exactly. The music helps set the emotional and physiological stage.
Okay. What else besides music?
Contagion. This is literally catching emotions from others, often through mimicry.
Like yawning.
Kind of. If a friendly game character smiles and expresses excitement, wow, let's try this amazing puzzle. A child might subtly mimic that expression and actually start to feel more positive themselves.
Or seeing classmates getting really into a game.
Totally contagious. Enthusiasm spreads. That's why a positive classroom atmosphere around GBL matters.
And the third way.
Empathy. Understanding and sometimes mirroring or responding to others' feelings.
Even with game characters.
Yeah. If a virtual guide looks sad because the student is struggling, the student might feel motivated to try harder to cheer up the character. Or in a collaborative game, feeling a teammate's frustration might prompt a student to offer help or encouragement. It builds social-emotional connection.
Okay, so appraisals and emotional transmission are the immediate triggers. What about those background distal factors?
Right, the learner characteristics.
Yeah.
Every student brings their own baggage, their own tendencies to the game.
Like their personality.
Sort of. One big one is achievement goals. Why are they engaging with the task?
You mean, are they trying to learn or just trying to look smart?
Basically, yeah. Some students have mastery approach goals. They want to understand the material, improve their skills, really master it for its own sake. Think of a kid playing a typing game purely to get faster and more accurate for themselves.
That sounds like a good goal to have.
It generally leads to more enjoyment, less boredom, and deeper learning. They value the process.
What are the other types?
Performance approach goals. Here, the focus is on showing off competence, doing better than others, getting the highest score, being top of the leaderboard.
So motivated by competition.
Often, yes. This can definitely drive effort and lead to pride if they succeed, but the motivation is external.
And the last one?
Performance avoidance goals. This is about not looking incompetent, avoiding failure, avoiding being last.
Oh, that sounds stressful.
It really can be. It often leads to anxiety, shame, and focusing energy on just not messing up, rather than on learning. So encouraging mastery goals is usually more beneficial emotionally.
What other characteristics matter?
A huge one, especially for elementary kids, is their implicit theory of intelligence.
You mean whether they think intelligence is fixed or can grow? Mindset stuff?
Exactly. Do they have a fixed mindset? I'm just not a math person.
No.
Or a growth mindset? Math is hard, but I can get better if I practice.
And that affects emotions in games.
Massively.
Yeah.
Kids with a growth mindset tend to see challenges in games as opportunities to learn. They feel more in control and have more positive emotions.
Yeah.
Kids with a fixed mindset might feel anxious or helpless when faced with difficulty, assuming they just don't have the talent.
So game design could even influence mindset.
Absolutely. How failure is handled, the kind of feedback given.
Yeah.
It all sends messages about whether effort or innate ability matters more.
What about things like gender?
Gender can play a role, sometimes based on stereotypes or preferences, although things are changing fast. Maybe historically, some research suggested girls might prefer narrative, cooperative games, boys more competition. But it's crucial not to overgeneralize.
Right, avoid stereotypes.
The key is to offer variety and ensure game themes or mechanics don't unintentionally exclude anyone. Good design appeals broadly. Traditional differences are really blurring now.
Okay. Any other big learner factors?
Epistemic beliefs, what kids believe about knowledge itself. Is there always one right answer? Simple view, or is knowledge complex and evolving?
How does that affect emotion?
A student who thinks knowledge is simple might get really frustrated by a game presenting multiple perspectives or ambiguity. Someone who sees knowledge as complex might find that same ambiguity intriguing and enjoy the challenge of figuring it out.
Interesting. And finally,
Prior knowledge and cognitive ability. Pretty straightforward. Kids who already know more about a topic or who grasp concepts quickly generally feel more in control and find the game more valuable.
so they tend to have more positive emotions.
Usually, yes. Less frustration, more enjoyment. Which means we need good scaffolding for kids who are struggling with the content.
Okay, that's a comprehensive look at where emotions come from. Now, the big payoff question. What do these emotions actually do for learning? The so what factor.
Right, the functions and outcomes.
Yeah.
Because, again, they aren't just feelings floating by. They actively shape the learning process through cognitive and motivational mechanisms.
Let's start with motivation. How do emotions drive that?
Well, positive activating emotions, joy, curiosity, excitement, pride, they're like fuel. They mobilize energy, encourage effort, make students want to invest time and persist.
Like that kid curious about the virtual animal.
Exactly. That curiosity makes them explore longer, learn more deeply, just because it feels good and interesting. Pride after success makes them eager for the next challenge. It builds momentum.
And the opposite.
Negative deactivating emotions, boredom, hopelessness, they're like hitting the brakes. They kill motivation.
Leading to
Off-task behavior. like messing with the avatar instead of doing the math problems, or just clicking through answers randomly to finish faster, gaming the system without learning. It's a huge problem if the GBL isn't engaging.
What about those trickier emotions, like relief or anxiety?
Their effects are more variable. Relief, feeling good after a struggle, might actually decrease effort right then because the pressure's off. But long-term, it can reinforce that the struggle was worthwhile, encouraging future effort.
And negative activating ones, like anxiety or shame.
These can be complex. They often undermine intrinsic motivation learning for the love of it. But they can sometimes boost extrinsic motivation, trying hard to avoid feeling ashamed again, or to beat someone else out of envy.
So anxiety about a timer might make a kid rush and learn less deeply.
If they care about deep learning. But if they just care about not failing, that anxiety might actually make them focus more. Paradoxically, it's context dependent. But generally, relying on anxiety or shame for motivation isn't ideal.
Okay, so motivation is clearly affected. What about thinking? Cognitive resources.
Emotions take up brain space. They can impose what's called extraneous cognitive load.
Meaning they distract you.
Yeah. If a student's worrying about a fight they had earlier, a task external emotion, that worry uses up working memory capacity needed for learning the game's content. It disrupts focus.
But what about emotions from the game?
This is cool. Task internal emotions, like enjoyment of the game's challenge or curiosity about the topic, can actually focus attention. And even positive feelings from just good aesthetic design, nice graphics, pleasant music, can reduce the perceived difficulty of the task.
So a beautiful game might make hard math problems feel less overwhelming.
Exactly. It doesn't make the math easier, but it frees up cognitive resources by making the experience more pleasant and engaging, reducing the mental load of just dealing with the interface or the environment.
That's a subtle but powerful effect. How do emotions impact memory and learning strategies?
Profoundly. Generally, positive activating emotions promote better learning strategies, more flexible thinking, deeper processing.
Like trying to connect new ideas to old ones.
Yeah, elaboration, organization, critical thinking. If you're enjoying a history game, you're more likely to actively think about the causes and effects, organize the timeline in your head, really engage with it.
And what about confusion? You said it could be good.
Right. That productive confusion, if resolved, often leads to really deep processing. The struggle to figure it out forces you to think critically, try different approaches, really elaborate on the information. That aha moment sticks with you.
But other negative emotions, anxiety, shame.
Those tend to push learners towards more rigid strategies, like rote memorization or just trying to guess the right answer rather than deep understanding.
And boredom or hopelessness.
Those undermine strategic effort altogether, leads to superficial processing, just skimming, or giving up on trying to learn strategically.
How does all this tie into self-regulation, being able to manage your own learning?
Big connection there. Positive activating emotions facilitate self-regulation. An engaged, curious student is more likely to set goals, monitor their progress in the game, adjust their strategies when stuck, and persist. They take ownership.
While negative emotions hinder that.
Often, yes. Feeling overwhelmed, anxious, or just plain bored can make students more passive, relying on the game to tell them exactly what to do or giving up easily. They're less likely to engage in that active, self-directed learning GBL can foster.
So wrapping up the so what part, overall learning outcomes.
The pattern is pretty clear. Positive activating emotions generally enhance learning outcomes. Good feelings like enjoyment and curiosity are consistently linked to better performance.
And negative deactivating ones, like boredom.
Almost always bad for learning. Hopelessness, too. The effects of things like anxiety, frustration, confusion are more mixed, depending heavily on the context and how they're managed within the game design.
Okay, this really drives home that designing for emotion isn't optional, it's fundamental.
Absolutely. It's not about just making things superficially fun. It's about understanding this whole complex interplay and designing environments that support positive, productive, emotional experiences for learning.
Which brings us to the really practical stuff. How do we actually do that? As elementary ed majors thinking about using or even creating GBL, what are the levers we can pull?
Right, the design implications. And first, let's ditch that chocolate-covered broccoli idea for good. Simply adding points or badges to a boring task doesn't work because it ignores the underlying emotional dynamics of control and value.
The design needs to be deeper, more integrated.
Totally, because emotions are shaped by everything: the look, the sound, the rules, the story. So let's break down some key design features. First up, Visual aesthetic design.
The look and feel. How much does that really matter?
A lot. It's often the first impression. Think about color. Warm, bright colors, yellows, pinks, oranges, tend to boost positive feelings, energy. Using cheerful palettes in a game for young readers makes it feel inviting, not intimidating.
Green for success, maybe. Red for warnings.
Often, yeah. Green can signal hope or progress. Red grabs attention but needs care too much, can feel alarming, or signify failure too harshly for little kids. Darker colors might be used for mood, but sparingly in core learning areas.
What about shapes? You mentioned round shapes earlier.
Yes, shape matters too. Round, soft, maybe even face-like shapes often feel friendlier, safer, more approachable to kids. Think about cute, rounded characters in a math game versus sharp, angular ones. It sets a different emotional tone.
And the characters themselves, the agents or guides.
Agent appearance is key. Kids often respond positively to characters that seem attractive in a kid-friendly way, somewhat realistic, and maybe even similar to them in age or style. A friendly animal guide or an older peer-like character can feel supportive.
And letting kids make their own character.
Huge.
Yeah.
Avatar customization. Letting kids choose hair, clothes, accessories, maybe a pet. It gives them a massive sense of ownership and control. They identify with their avatar, boosting pride and engagement. It makes the game theirs.
Okay, visuals are important. What about sound?
The musical score and sound design are incredibly powerful emotional tools.
You mentioned tempo and mode earlier. Fast and major key for energy.
Generally, yes. Upbeat, major key music for a quick sorting game. Calmer, maybe slower music for thoughtful problem solving. The sound should match the task's demands and the desired emotional state.
And the voices.
Vocal sound of non-player characters matters. Human-like expressive voices are usually better than robotic ones. A calm, encouraging tone from a virtual tutor can lower anxiety. An excited voice-sharing enthusiasm can be contagious. Pitch, volume, speed all contribute.
And those little sounds. Feedback sounds.
Sound feedback is critical for subtle emotional regulation. A gentle chime for a wrong answer, not a harsh buzz. A celebratory fanfare for success. These sounds guide attention and shape how kids feel about mistakes and achievements.
Okay, visuals and sound set the stage. What about the core gameplay? The game mechanics.
This is the heart of it. First, alignment with learning content must be perfect. The game mechanic is the learning.
Like if you're teaching fractions, the game is about dividing things.
Exactly. Not just some unrelated minigame you play after doing fraction problems. If the mechanic and content clash, kids get frustrated or see the learning as a hurdle to the fun part. When aligned, learning feels intrinsically valuable.
What about how hard the tasks are?
Task clarity and demands. Needs to be clear, not confusing. Use visuals for instructions with young kids. And finding that optimal challenge level, not too easy, boredom, not too hard, frustration. Productive confusion is okay, but only if it's solvable with effort.
Which requires good support.
Right. Scaffolding. Providing help without taking away their sense of control. Things like adaptive difficulty, optional hints, maybe prompts like, what could you try next?
Like training wheels that come off as they get better.
Perfect analogy. Intelligent games adapt the scaffolding based on how the student is doing. For elementary kids, maybe visual aids fade out, or sentence starters in a writing game become less frequent as they improve. It builds confidence.
What about playing with others? Social interaction.
Can be great for enjoyment and motivation. But the cooperative versus competitive design is a huge choice, especially for younger kids.
Cooperative usually better.
Often, yes. Working together towards a shared goal tends to foster more positive emotions, teamwork, and deeper understanding. Think building a virtual community garden using science concepts together.
Competition can cause anxiety or envy.
It can, if not handled carefully. Maybe competing against your own previous score or contributing to a class total is less fraught than direct win-lose against peers for some kids or some learning goals. Balance is key.
What about the story? The narrative?
A compelling story gives context, builds suspense, adds meaning, maybe even humor. It turns abstract concepts into a journey.
Does it need to be super complicated?
Not necessarily, especially for young kids. But it needs accessibility and entertainment value. It should pull them in, make them care about the characters or the goal.
And letting kids make choices in the story.
Big plus. Nonlinear structures and player choice give them agency. If their decisions affect how the history simulation unfolds, they feel more control and see cause and effect more clearly.
And feedback can be part of the story too.
Yes. Feedback through plot. Instead of wrong, maybe making a poor choice in the game leads to a narrative consequence, a setback they need to overcome. It feels less like judgment, more like part of the adventure.
Okay, last major area, incentive system and feedback. Rewards, points, badges.
Right. How the game acknowledges progress and effort. There are lots of types of incentives: progress bars, points to spend, badges for milestones, unlocking new levels or cool virtual items.
These tap into that perceived value idea.
Exactly. They provide instrumental value. The reward makes the effort feel worthwhile. It could be intrinsically valuable, unlocking more cool game content, or extrinsic points for avatar fashion.
How should we design these to support good goal orientations?
Ideally, focus rewards on mastery and effort, not just winning or being the fastest. Badges like Problem Solving Pro or Persistent Player reinforce growth mindset. Social comparison rewards, top scorer, can be motivating for some, but use them cautiously.
And the feedback itself, not just the reward.
Needs to be control-enhancing feedback. Focus on effort, strategy use, and improvement. Wow, you're really focused and used the hint tool well on that one, rather than just correct. Reinforce how they succeeded.
Should kids get to choose their rewards?
Offering learner choice can boost motivation, pick a sticker or a new background, but beware of making rewards too salient or flashy. If the focus is only on the extrinsic reward, it can undermine intrinsic interest in learning over time. And constantly showing leaderboards if a child is struggling can be really demotivating. It's a balance.
Wow, okay. That's a lot to think about, but it really connects the dots between the theory and actual classroom practice.
It really does. Designing GBL isn't just about code or graphics. It's fundamentally about designing an emotional journey that supports learning.
So let's recap quickly. We've really dug into how emotions aren't just side effects in GBL, they're core drivers.
Absolutely. We saw how they're tied into attention, memory, motivation, problem solving, everything. And it's not just about making things fun.
Right. It's about understanding that whole spectrum: joy, curiosity, frustration, confusion, and designing intentionally to leverage those feelings for deeper learning.
Understanding where they come from, those appraisals of control and value, the social influences, and knowing what they do to the learning process.
And then using all those design features, visual, sound, mechanics, narrative, feedback thoughtfully, not just as decoration.
Exactly. It's about creating environments where positive, activating emotions thrive, where challenges feel manageable, and where even confusion becomes a stepping stone to understanding.
So here's a final thought for you, our listener, the elementary education major thinking about all this. Consider this. How could designing GBL with this deep understanding of emotions help you reach those students who struggle in traditional settings?
Yeah, the kids who maybe aren't struggling because of ability, but because their main experience of school learning has been, well, anxiety or boredom or just constant frustration.
How can GBL, when done right, focusing on control, value, graceful failure, sparking curiosity, become a pathway? A pathway to learning that feels joyful, engaging, persistent, truly self-regulated.
How can it help every child develop not just knowledge, but maybe rediscover or discover for the first time a genuine love for learning itself?
It's a powerful possibility, isn't it?
It really is. And GBL, designed with this kind of emotional intelligence, has a unique potential to help make that happen.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the emotional heart of game-based learning. We really hope it's given you some valuable perspectives and practical ideas for your journey.
Yeah, thanks for listening. It's exciting stuff.